The Vanishing Bunker, a secret never meant to be found. Tell Late Night Story. Welcome to DTC, the place of the brave, where we dive deep into mysteries that defy explanation, stories that challenge reality, and encounters that make you question what truly exists in the dark corners of our world. Tonight, we bring you a chilling tale. The Vanishing Bunker, a secret never meant to be found. Imagine this: you're on a peaceful solo hike, following a familiar trail when you decide to take a shortcut. A seemingly innocent choice, but one that leads you to something you were never supposed to see. A hidden shack, a metal trapdoor, a bunker beneath the earth. At first it seems abandoned, but as night falls you hear something moving below. Footsteps, a presence, something or someone trying to escape. By sunrise the entrance is gone, erased as if it had never existed. Who or what was down there? And more importantly, why was it hidden? Join us as we unravel this terrifying true story. But be warned, some secrets don't just disappear. Sometimes they come looking for those who find them. This is DTC, the place of the brave. And this is a story you won't forget. Listen at your own risk. The evening air was cool and crisp as I set off on my usual hiking trail, inhaling deeply to take in the fresh scent of damp leaves and pine needles. The sky overhead was painted in hues of orange and purple as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long, twisting shadows through the dense forest. The sounds of nature surrounded me, crickets chirping, an owl hooting in the distance, and the gentle rustling of branches swaying in the breeze. This was the kind of solitude I always cherished, a moment to escape the chaos of daily life and lose myself in the quiet beauty of the woods. I had walked this trail more times than I could count. Every turn, every incline felt familiar, as if the path had become an extension of my own memory after years of exploring it. But today, as the sun sank lower and the air grew colder, I glanced at my watch and realized I was behind schedule. I had lingered too long at the scenic overlook, captivated by the breathtaking view of the sun setting over the distant hills. If I didn't pick up my pace, I'd be walking back in the dark, something I wasn't eager to do in a forest this dense. That was when I noticed a faint, overgrown path branching off to the right. I paused, trying to recall if I had ever seen it before. It wasn't part of the marked trail, but it looked well trodden, as if it had once been in regular use. A shortcut, perhaps. It seemed like a good way to shave off some time and get back before nightfall. Adjusting my backpack, I decided to take the risk. The moment I stepped onto the unmarked path, something felt different. The air grew heavier, as though the forest had suddenly thickened around me. The trees loomed taller, their branches intertwining overhead, swallowing what little daylight remained. The sounds of the forest seemed to change as well, quieter, more distant. The undergrowth was thick, and with each step, dry leaves and twigs snapped loudly beneath my boots. I pressed on, moving quickly. The path, though overgrown, remained visible beneath layers of fallen foliage and creeping vines. It twisted and turned, making it impossible to see too far ahead. Then, just as I began to wonder if this was really a shortcut, I saw it. A structure, barely visible through the tangled branches. At first I thought it was just a moss-covered rock formation, but as I stepped closer I realized it was something else entirely. Embedded into the hillside was a rusted metal door, weathered by time. There were no signs, no markings, just a thick circular handle in the center. My pulse quickened. What was this? An old storage bunker? A storm shelter? It looked abandoned, forgotten. I took a cautious step forward, running my fingers along the corroded metal. The door was cold, despite the lingering warmth of the day. A part of me knew I should keep walking. There was something unsettling about how hidden this place was, as if it had been meant to stay that way. And yet, curiosity burned stronger. I gripped the handle and pulled. At first, it refused to budge. the rust sealing it shut after years of neglect. But with another firm tug, the door groaned loudly and cracked open, releasing a gust of stale, musty air. I hesitated. The scent was thick with dampness, dust, and something else, something metallic and sharp like old blood. I fumbled for my flashlight, switched it on, and aimed the beam inside. Concrete walls lined with old pipes, some still dripping with condensation. A cracked tile floor littered with dirt and fallen debris. The bunker stretched further than I had expected, disappearing into darkness. I stepped inside, my breath echoing softly. Then, at the far end of the passage, something glinted under my flashlight's beam. A metal table. As I approached, I noticed deep scratches on its surface, as though something heavy had been dragged across it repeatedly. Rusted chains dangled from the corners, their ends lying limply on the floor. My stomach turned. This wasn't just some abandoned shelter. This place had a purpose, and whatever it had been used for, it hadn't been good. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but before I could turn back, a faint sound echoed from deeper within the bunker, a soft, distant clink, metal against metal. I wasn't alone. Spinning around, I rushed back toward the entrance, my heart pounding. The air felt suffocating, the darkness closing in. The doorway was still open, the forest visible just beyond, but just as I reached it, something heavy crashed behind me. I whipped around, flashlight trembling in my grip. Nothing. Just the empty passage stretching into the darkness. But something had moved. Then, just as I stepped outside, the bunker door slammed shut behind me with a deafening clang. I stumbled backward, breath ragged, staring at the rusted door in disbelief. The shortcut had been a mistake. After fleeing the bunker, I had run blindly through the forest, desperate to put as much distance between myself and that door as possible. But in my panic, I had lost my bearings. The familiar landmarks had vanished, swallowed by the deepening night. The trees looked the same in every direction, their looming silhouettes creating an endless maze of shadows. Darkness had fallen completely now. The forest was no longer the peaceful place I had known. It had transformed into something vast, cold, and unfamiliar. The occasional rustling in the underbrush made my skin crawl. Every distant snap of a twig sent a chill through my spine. I wasn't sure if it was just the natural sounds of the woods at night, or if something else was out there. I pulled out my phone, praying for signal. My heart sank when I saw the battery, 5%, no service, no GPS. Just me, the endless darkness, and the unsettling knowledge that I had no idea which way led home. I forced myself to take deep breaths. Panicking wouldn't help. Running in circles would only make things worse. I needed to find shelter, somewhere safe to wait out the night until daylight gave me a better chance of navigating my way back. Sweeping my flashlight across the forest, I searched for anything that could provide cover. A hollowed-out tree, a rocky overhang, anything. Then I saw it. Not far ahead, beneath a tangle of branches, was a large rock formation. It looked like it had a small hollow beneath it, just big enough to crawl into. I hesitated, but what choice did I have? Standing exposed in the open forest with someone, possibly watching me. With a steadying breath, I took a step forward, every nerve in my body bracing for whatever came next. I had no idea how long I had been walking. The forest felt endless, each twisted tree blending into the next, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. My flashlight flickered, its dim beam barely piercing the suffocating darkness. Every rustling sound, every distant snap of a twig made my skin crawl. The cold had settled in, creeping through my clothes, wrapping around my bones. I needed shelter. Then, through the tangled underbrush, I saw it. A shack, small, wooden, and barely standing, hidden among the trees. The sight of it sent a wave of relief through me, though a part of me hesitated. The structure looked ancient, as if it had been abandoned for decades. The roof sagged under the weight of time, and the wooden walls were weathered and warped. But in this moment, it didn't matter how eerie it looked. It was shelter, and I had no other choice. Pushing through the overgrown weeds, I approached the front door, which hung slightly ajar. A gust of stale, musty air greeted me as I stepped inside. My flashlight revealed a single, dust-covered room. The wooden floor creaked beneath my weight, protesting my intrusion. There was almost nothing inside, just an old table, a few broken chairs, and a rickety wooden bed frame without a mattress. A thick layer of dust coated everything, undisturbed for what must have been years. Cobwebs hung from the rafters like forgotten curtains. I swallowed hard. The shack felt wrong, though I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the silence, too heavy, too unnatural, or maybe it was the feeling that I wasn't supposed to be here. But I was exhausted, freezing, and lost. Whatever unease gnawed at my gut, I had no choice but to ignore it. I closed the door behind me, wedging a broken chair under the handle for good measure. It wouldn't stop anything or anyone from coming in, but it gave me a sliver of comfort. With a sigh, I dropped my backpack onto the floor, my body aching from exhaustion. Sitting on the edge of the splintered bed frame, I let my flashlight rest on the table, casting shaky shadows across the walls. That was when I noticed it. The dust on the floor, thick and undisturbed everywhere else, had been moved near the farthest corner of the room. Footprints, faint but there, and they weren't mine. A chill ran through me, colder than the night outside. I wasn't the first person to take shelter here, but the real question was I alone now? I sat frozen on the edge of the splintered bed frame, my breath slow, controlled, listening. The faint footprints in the dust near the corner of the room sent a fresh wave of unease through me. Someone had been here, but how long ago, and had they ever left? I gripped my flashlight tightly, its dim glow casting jagged shadows across the walls. The air inside the shack felt stagnant, thick with dust and something else, something old and forgotten. My phone's battery was hanging by a thread, and I knew I had to conserve what little power I had left. I forced myself to move, scanning the room carefully. If someone had once used this place, maybe they had left something behind. Anything that could tell me where I was or how to find my way back in the morning. That was when I noticed it. Near the farthest corner of the shack, right where the footprints led, the wooden floor seemed off. The planks were uneven, slightly raised in places as if something had been moved. Slowly, cautiously, I stepped closer, my boots stirring the thick layer of dust that had settled there for years. Then I saw it. A rug, thin, tattered, barely more than a piece of rotting fabric, half buried under dust and debris. But something about the way it lay felt unnatural, as if it had been positioned there deliberately. My pulse quickened as I crouched down, gripping the edges with trembling fingers. I pulled. The rug lifted easily, releasing a small cloud of dust into the air, and beneath it I saw something that made my stomach clench. Metal. A trapdoor. The sight of it sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. The wood around it was old, warped, but the trapdoor itself, sturdy metal with a heavy iron handle, was different, newer, stronger, as if it had been built long after the shack itself. And it wasn't fully closed. There was a gap, small, barely an inch wide, but enough to reveal a sliver of pure darkness below. A hollow space, a passage leading underground. My breathing grew shallow. Who had built this? And why had they tried to hide it? I reached out hesitantly, fingertips grazing the cold metal. The handle was slick with dust, but there were no cobwebs around it, no signs that it had been untouched for decades. Someone had used this, and not too long ago. A part of me screamed to leave it alone, to grab my things, barricade the door, and wait for daylight. But another part of me, the same reckless curiosity that had led me into the woods in the first place, wouldn't let go. I gripped the handle, and I pulled. If you love spine-chilling stories, mysterious encounters, and tales that make you question what's real, you're in the right place. Subscribe to DTC, the Place of the Brave, and become part of a community that dares to explore the unexplained. Like this video if you enjoy real horror experiences and stories that keep you up at night. Turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying new story. Because trust me, some things are best heard before the lights go out. Are you brave enough to keep listening? Hit subscribe and find out. I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the cold metal handle of the trapdoor. The gap in the floor seemed to breathe darkness, a deep, yawning void leading into the unknown. Every rational thought in my head screamed at me to leave it shut, to pretend I had never seen it. But curiosity had already led me too far. I pulled. The trapdoor groaned as it lifted, the rusted hinges resisting at first before giving way with an eerie creak. My flashlight's beam spilled into the opening, revealing a set of metal stairs descending into blackness. A stale, musty scent wafted up, thick with damp earth and something else, something metallic, like rust or old blood. I swallowed hard. Peering deeper, I could make out the rough concrete walls of a narrow passage. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping with moisture. The air down there was different, denser, as if it had been trapped for years. I didn't want to go down. Instead, I slammed the trapdoor shut and shoved the dusty rug back over it, a weak attempt at pretending I hadn't just uncovered something I was never meant to find. I backed away slowly, returning to the rickety bed frame. My body was exhausted, my mind racing, but sleep was out of the question. The shack no longer felt like shelter, it felt like a trap. The weight of the bunker beneath me pressed against my thoughts, making my skin crawl. But what choice did I have? I leaned back against the cold wooden wall, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. My phone was nearly dead. The forest outside was a maze. The best I could do was wait for morning. I don't know how long I sat there, my mind teetering between exhaustion and alertness. Every small creak of the shack sent my heart racing. The wind outside whispered through the trees, but inside the silence stretched, thick and unnatural. Then, just as my eyelids began to droop, I heard it. A sound, soft at first, almost imperceptible. Footsteps, but not from outside, from beneath me. My breath caught in my throat. My grip tightened around my flashlight. The sound was unmistakable, slow, deliberate steps coming up from the bunker. For a moment, my brain refused to process it. I sat frozen, every muscle locked in place. The floor beneath me was solid wood, but I could feel the vibrations, the subtle shift in the air. Someone or something was climbing the stairs. Then the trapdoor rattled. Not a soft nudge, not the wind. A violent shove, as if something on the other side was trying to force it open. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering against my ribs. My mind raced through possibilities. Had I somehow triggered something by opening the door? Had whoever used this bunker heard me? I grabbed the nearest object, a broken wooden plank leaning against the wall, and held it in front of me like a makeshift weapon. My voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper at first. "Who's there?" The rattling stopped. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence that made my ears ring. My breathing was too loud, too sharp in the still air. Then footsteps, but this time they weren't coming up. They were moving away. Something or someone was retreating back down the stairs. A moment later, I heard a different sound, a door slamming shut. And then, nothing. No movement, no breathing, just the distant hum of the wind outside. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the broken plank still clenched in my hands, my knuckles white. My knees felt weak, my mind trying to rationalize what had just happened. Had it been an animal, a person, something else? I didn't want to find out. I grabbed my backpack, slung it over my shoulder, and moved toward the door. The night outside was dark, unfamiliar, but anything was better than staying in that shack. I hesitated only once, just long enough to pull the broken chair away from the door. Then, without looking back, I pushed it open and ran. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I welcomed it. I plunged into the trees, my breath ragged, my footsteps uneven as I fought my way through the underbrush. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. All I knew was that I had to get as far away from that trapdoor as possible, and whatever had been beneath it. I didn't stop running until my legs refused to move any further. The night pressed in from all sides, the skeletal trees swaying in the wind like silent spectators. My breath came in ragged gasps, each step crunching against the forest floor, twigs snapping underfoot. My flashlight flickered, its weak beam barely illuminating the path ahead. My mind screamed at me to keep going, but my body was breaking down, cold, exhausted, and drained from terror. I had no idea where I was anymore. The forest had twisted itself into a maze of shadows, every path looking the same. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going back to that shack. I found a tree with thick gnarled roots and sank against it, gripping my backpack like a lifeline. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I strained to listen for any sounds beyond the wind, footsteps, rustling, breathing, but there was nothing. Had whatever was beneath that trapdoor followed me? Had I really heard those footsteps moving away, or had they simply waited for me to let my guard down? I forced my eyes to stay open, clutching the broken wooden plank I had carried from the shack. But exhaustion was stronger than fear, and eventually my body gave in. I don't know when I fell asleep. I only remember waking to the soft glow of early morning, the sky a muted gray as the sun began to rise. The world felt eerily still, as if the events of the night had been nothing more than a fever dream. But the ache in my legs and the dust still clinging to my clothes told me otherwise. I was still lost. But in daylight, the forest was no longer a suffocating abyss. It was just trees, just an endless stretch of earth and sky. I took a slow, steadying breath. I needed to find my way back, and yet something in me needed to go back to the shack first. I knew it was reckless. I knew that whatever had happened last night should have been reason enough to never step foot near that place again. But the bunker, the trapdoor that had rattled beneath me, I had to see it in daylight. Had it really been open? Had I imagined the whole thing? With hesitant steps, I retraced my path, the trees parting just enough to reveal the familiar decaying structure ahead. In the light of day, the shack looked even more miserable, its wooden walls warped, its windows clouded with grime. I approached slowly, my boots crunching against the frost-dusted leaves. My heart pounded as I reached for the door handle and pushed. It creaked open. Everything inside was exactly as I had left it. The dust-covered furniture, the footprints near the corner, the broken chair still resting against the wall. The rug, thin, tattered, still lay where I had hastily thrown it the night before. But when I pulled it back, the trapdoor was sealed shut. My stomach turned to ice. I dropped to my knees, running my hands over the smooth metal. It was flush with the floor, no gap, no handle, no hinges, as if it had never been there at all. Frantically, I traced the edges, pressing, knocking, trying to find the hidden seam where I had lifted it the night before. My fingers scraped against the wooden planks, my breath coming in fast, shallow bursts. Nothing. The bunker, the opening, the stairs leading down into the darkness, gone. I staggered back, shaking my head. No, it had been here. I had seen it. I had opened it. I had heard the footsteps. Hadn't I? I scrambled to my feet and ran my flashlight over the floor. Dust had resettled across the wooden planks, undisturbed except for my own handprints. There were no scratches, no signs that a heavy metal door had been moved. It was as if I had imagined the entire thing. I stumbled away from the corner, gripping my forehead. The memory was so vivid. The stale air, the rusted chains in the bunker, the distant clink of metal from below. But standing here now, in the cold morning light, it felt unreal. Was it possible that exhaustion, fear, and the shadows of the forest had tricked me? Had I dreamed the entire nightmarish encounter? Number, I refused to believe that. Something had been down there. Something had tried to come up. And now, somehow, it had erased all traces of its existence. I needed to leave. Grabbing my backpack, I turned and stepped outside, inhaling the crisp morning air like a drowning man gasping for breath. The forest around me was quiet, still. I scanned the tree line, half expecting to see movement, someone standing in the distance, watching, but there was nothing. I took one last glance at the shack. It looked the same as it had the day before, worn, forgotten, abandoned. A place no one had set foot in for years. But I knew better. Whatever had been beneath that trapdoor, it had been real. And now, it was gone. Or worse, it was never meant to be found. Suppressing a shiver, I turned away and started walking. This time I wouldn't stop until I found my way out of the forest. I didn't know what had happened in that shack. I didn't know who or what had built that bunker. And it had made sure that I would never find it again. If you love spine-chilling stories, mysterious encounters, and tales that make you question what's real, you're in the right place. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, and become part of a community that dares to explore the unexplained. Like this video if you enjoy real horror experiences and stories that keep you up at night. Turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying new story, because trust me, some things are best heard before the lights go out. Are you brave enough to keep listening? Hit subscribe and find out. By the time I stumbled out of the forest and onto the edge of town, the world felt distant, like I was walking through a dream that wasn't mine. The familiar streets, the glow of streetlights flickering against the pavement, the quiet hum of passing cars, it all felt so mundane, so ordinary, and yet the memory of the shack and the bunker beneath it burned in my mind like a brand, refusing to fade. I knew I had to tell someone. At the nearest police station, I found myself seated across from a skeptical officer, his gaze flicking between me and the notepad in front of him. My clothes were still covered in dust, my hands trembling slightly as I recounted every detail. The bunker, the metal door, the footsteps in the dark, the way it had all disappeared by morning. I expected questions, urgency, maybe even an offer to send a search team. Instead, the officer sighed, leaning back in his chair. "That area's been abandoned for decades," he said, tapping his pen against the desk. "There's no bunker out there, probably just an old root cellar." I shook my head. Number, it was metal. It wasn't just some hole in the ground. It had stairs. There were rooms. I saw... "You were in the woods all night?" He cut me off. I hesitated, my mouth suddenly dry. "Yes." "And you said you were exhausted?" I clenched my fists. I already knew where this was going. "You were probably disoriented," the officer continued. "The mind plays tricks on you, especially in a dark forest. I've seen hikers come in swearing they saw ghosts, creatures, you name it. But when we go back out there, there's nothing." "But I heard something," I insisted. "Something was in that bunker." He exchanged a glance with the other officer in the room, a silent conversation I wasn't meant to be part of. Then he sighed again. "Look," he said, voice softer now, like he was explaining something to a child. "If you want, we can send someone out there in the morning to check. But I promise you, it was just your imagination." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him and tell him that what I saw was real. That the trapdoor had been open, that I hadn't imagined the footsteps, the rattling, the way the door slammed shut like something was sealing itself away. But what proof did I have? By morning, the bunker had disappeared. By morning, there had been no sign it ever existed. I left the station feeling more alone than I had in the depths of that forest. But I wasn't done. If no one believed me, I'd prove it myself. The return to the shack. I wasn't going back alone. The next afternoon, I convinced a small group of friends to come with me, 3 people who had grown up exploring the same woods and who trusted me enough to know I wasn't making this up. They were skeptical but curious, and maybe a little excited by the idea of uncovering something hidden. I didn't tell them everything. I didn't mention the footsteps beneath me or the way the trapdoor rattled violently in the middle of the night. If I told them everything, I knew they might not come at all. By the time we reached the shack, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the trees. In daylight, the structure looked as abandoned and harmless as any old hunting cabin, except I knew better. "This is it?" one of them asked, kicking at the ground near the doorway. "Looks like it's been empty for years." I ignored them, my pulse spiking as I pushed open the door. Everything inside was exactly as I had left it. The same broken furniture, the same dust-covered floor, the same musty air hanging heavy in the room. Except one thing was different. The floor was untouched. The footprints I had seen the night before, the ones that had led to the hidden trapdoor, were gone. My heart pounded as I rushed to the corner, shoving the rug aside. My hands hit dirt, cold, packed earth. No metal, no seams, no trapdoor. "No," I whispered, frantically scraping at the ground. It had to be here. It had to be, but there was nothing. One of my friends crouched beside me. "What are you looking for?" "There was..." My voice faltered. "There was a bunker here, a metal door. I opened it." They exchanged glances. "Dude," another one said, shifting uncomfortably, "there's nothing here. It's just dirt." I refused to believe it. I dug my fingers into the ground, scraping away layers of dry leaves and dust, searching for even a hint of metal beneath the surface. I found none. It was as if the ground had never been disturbed, as if the bunker had never existed. I sat back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. This wasn't possible. I had been here. I had seen it with my own eyes, hadn't I? I felt the weight of my friends' stares, a quiet concern growing in their expressions. "Maybe you dreamed it," one of them offered gently. I shook my head. "Number, I heard something down there. I heard footsteps." But as I said it out loud, doubt started creeping in. Had I imagined it? Had exhaustion twisted my mind into seeing something that wasn't there? Numbers. Number. It was real. Something had been in that bunker. Something had sealed it away. And whatever it was, it had made sure that no one would ever find it again. My friends left, shaking their heads, chalking it up to exhaustion and fear playing tricks on me. But as I stood there staring at the spot where the trapdoor had once been, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had uncovered something I was never supposed to see, and that whoever or whatever was down there had made sure I would never find it again. Even now, long after that night in the forest, the questions haunt me. Who was in that bunker? Why did they run when I called out? And how did the entrance disappear overnight? No matter how many times I turn the memories over in my mind, I can't make sense of them. The authorities dismissed my story, my friends thought I had imagined it, and when I returned, the bunker was gone, erased from existence as if it had never been there. But I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. That night, when I lay on the floor of the shack, exhausted but unable to sleep, I had felt it, the shift in the air, the unnatural stillness before the first footstep echoed from below. I heard someone moving beneath me. I heard them climb the steps. I heard them rattle the trapdoor, trying to push it open. And then I heard them leave. Why? Why did they stop? If they had been trapped down there, why didn't they keep trying to get out? And more importantly, why had the entire entrance vanished the next day? Had I uncovered something that was never meant to be found? Had my presence somehow triggered something ancient, something forgotten? Or had whoever was down there been watching me long before I even found the shack? That thought alone sends a shiver down my spine. A secret that wanted to stay buried. For days after escaping the forest, I scoured every available record of the area. I searched through old maps, government archives, anything that might indicate the presence of a bunker in that part of the woods. I found nothing. No record of any underground structure, no mention of any abandoned facility, military or otherwise. As far as official documents were concerned, there had never been anything there. But I had felt the cold metal of that trapdoor. I had opened it. I had seen the narrow stairs leading into the depths below, and I had almost witnessed whatever was down there coming back up. The realization unsettles me even now. If no one had used that bunker in decades, then who was in it that night? And if it had been empty, then what had tried to come out? The wilderness keeps its secrets. Sometimes I lie awake at night, thinking about the impossible disappearance of that bunker. I wonder what would have happened if I had stayed, if I had waited just a little longer, if I had let the trapdoor open fully instead of yelling out in fear. Would I have seen something I wasn't supposed to? Would I have disappeared along with the bunker? Or was I just another unlucky traveler who had stumbled too close to something that didn't want to be found? The thought chills me more than the forest ever did, because if that's true, then I was never in danger of being hunted. I was in danger the moment I found it, and it or they had let me go. What I know now. I've told my story to countless people, friends, strangers, even hikers who venture into the same stretch of woods. Most listen with wide eyes, leaning in as if waiting for the part where I admit it was all a joke. I never do. And though they nod and shake their heads, amusement flickering in their expressions, I see it, the doubt, the hesitation. Because everyone who's spent enough time in the wild knows one thing: there are places you don't go, paths that weren't meant to be found, doors that should stay closed, and whatever was beneath that shack, it was never meant to be opened. Some secrets are buried for a reason, and next time I won't be the fool who tries to dig them up.